This webinar is the 5 Pilgrim Keys, key number 2, morality. Well, let's first get our mind around the word morality, as it's not often defined in society today. The doctrine or system of moral duties, or the duties of men in their social character. Ethics. Number 1, the practice of the moral duties, that is, virtues. Secondly, the quality of an action which renders it good, the conformity of an act to the divine law, or to the principles of rectitude. Well, what does the word rectitude mean? The rightness of principle or practice, uprightness of mind, exact conformity to truth. Perfect rectitude belongs only to the Supreme Being. The more nearly the rectitude of men approaches to the standard of the divine law, the more exalted and dignified is their character. Want of rectitude is not only sinful, but debasing. Well, let's take a look at what debasing means. Reducing in estimation or worth, adulterating, reducing in purity or elegance, degrading. To reduce from a higher to a lower state or rank. The drunkard debases himself and his character. Intemperance and debauchery debase men almost to a level with beasts. Vicious habits debase the mind as well as the character. So let's go back to this for a minute. The more nearly the actions and behavior of a person approaches to the standard of the divine law, the more exalted and dignified is their character. Well, let's take a look at this statue, morality, and make 4 observations. Firstly, the eyes are not finished. Morality looks inward. It's an inward reflective thing, and it comes from the heart. Second of all, as you can see on the arrow pointing to the statue, there's a breastplate necklace. This is an idea from the Old Testament that in a New Testament application that an individual follower of Christ has direct access to God and is a priest to their family. Thirdly, in her left hand is the 10 Commandments, which is God's direction for life, both in our relationship with Him but also in society. And then fourthly, in her right hand is the scroll of Revelation, that God is the Alpha and Omega and rules over all time. And here's a little bit more close-ups of each of these items. Eyes looking inward, the scroll of Revelation, the breastplate necklace, and the 10 Commandments in her left hand. But there's even more. There's these little statuettes on each side of her base. In a morality's case, those statuettes are the prophet and the evangelist, and they help further interpret our understanding of morality. The prophet's looking toward heaven to hear from God. He hears from God and follows God's direction. Moses was a prophet who walked and talked with God. The Pilgrims heard the call from God to leave England, and Governor Bradford said this, "Yet these and many other sharper things which afterward befell them were no other than what they had looked for, and therefore were better prepared to bear them by the assistance of God's grace and Spirit." They knew what they were undertaking was going to be tough business, and they knew that God had directed them to this cause, and they were willing to suffer for it. And so they had heard from God and understood and were not surprised by the difficulties they faced. The other statuette, the Evangelist is taking seed from the Bible and sowing it. You can see that in the statue where this red circle is. This is a common allegory for preaching the message of Christ. The Pilgrims desired to live out their faith, to be an example to others, and to share their faith with others. Again, Bradford says this, "They cherished a great hope and an inward zeal of laying a good foundation, or at least of making some way towards it, for the propagation and advance of the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in the remote parts of the world, even though they should be but stepping stones to others in the performance of so great a work." Well, also in her pedestal, a sculpted image, and again it's the embarkation in a stone format here, and then we looked at this picture in another webinar. Governor Bradford said this, "So they left that goodly and pleasant city, Debasement, which had been their resting place for nearly 12 years, which was near Leyden. But they knew they were pilgrims, and looked not much on those things, but lifted up their eyes to the heavens, their dearest country, and quieted their spirits." Well, morality was a statue that the Massachusetts state legislature paid for, this particular statue, as a statement that public servants ought to set an example of moral leadership for its citizens. And boy, do we need state legislatures that would make that statement again, because it does not seem to be the case in this day and age. Also, this sculpted stone, the embarkation, was paid by the Connecticut state legislature. They paid for this because Reverend Thomas Hooker actually embarked from the Massachusetts area with a group of pilgrims to Connecticut to establish self-government in Connecticut and further build the ideas of civil and constitutional government. So as we wrap up, morality. The more nearly the actions and behavior of a person approaches to the standard of the divine law, the more exalted and dignified is their character. My name's Craig Seibert. Thanks for listening.